Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the Dare Dallas webinar. Now, this is the third webinar in our second series or season if you're in the United States, and it's really nice to see you here. Thanks again for everyone who joined us last week with Annabelle. Really great response to that as well. And Annabelle was particularly brilliant, and it was a really nice in-depth view into how a jewellery valuer works. So thank you everyone for all your kind comments about that. Now, this week we're joined by my very good friend, Jonathan Horwich again. Now, to talk about this week, we actually had a bit of a chat, and there are lots of people and lots of artists that were coming up through this last bizarre year that we've all been through. And a few of them have caused quite a stir. And in terms of artists that people haven't heard about or images that people haven't seen before, it seems to be quite a good, fresh kind of influx of things like this. So, Jonathan, lovely to see you as always.
And you too.
Now, I'm going to bring up a few images that we shared actually with an article that went out this week. So, Jonathan, I'll just bring in some images, and if we could have a little bit of a chat about these, that would be great. So let's bring in this one first of all. And Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to do here is to give everyone a snapshot of what's going on in the world of art and auctions and galleries. And this is a fantastic example of a picture by Matthew Wong. And I've chosen a group of artists who are quite varied in age, some older than others. Matthew Wong sadly died last year, only aged 35.
Oh gosh, I didn't know that. Wow.
No, it was all rather sudden, and it in a sense almost coinciding with the interest in him. He's originally Canadian, but with Chinese heritage. And so this offers an example of, first of all, someone who I think is a very good painter. All of these artists are what I call narrative artists. In other words, you can recognize within what may be a slightly abstracted landscape like this one, but you can clearly see trees and a roadway and texture. So none of these artists that I've chosen here are pure abstract. And I think what's interesting here is how strong the interest is in these painters, almost as if, whether it's to do with the digital age, that people are actually choosing to go for narrative images. I mean, I hope that makes some sense. And here is really quite a significant picture by Matthew Wong. With his heritage, what you get is different opportunities as to where you would offer his work for sale. It could be London.
What's the medium of this, Jonathan? Sorry,
it's oil on canvas. All of these are in a very traditional medium again, and I hesitate to say it's a throwback, but you look at this, and for those of you who you've seen some of our previous webcasts with Ben and others, you might think, well, there's a David Hockney influence in this with the very strong colour.
I was about to say there's a clear kind of heart on the sleeve kind of scenario with this, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, he's not trying to imitate Hockney at all, yet somehow some elements of this come through, and it's very, very strong in colour. So someone with the heritage and background that Matthew has had, then you would imagine you'd see these in London and New York, or in this case, this particular picture was offered in Hong Kong with Philips, who recently joined forces in Hong Kong only, so in China, to sell alongside Poly auctions. Poly being, as far as I know, the largest auction house in mainland China. So this was quite a seminal moment for everybody, Philips and from work and collectors of work by Matthew Wong. And this, I've written down the figures here, but we're looking at a significant picture. It's just over 2 meters high and just under 2 meters wide. So it's quite a trophy-sized picture. It was offered just before Christmas last year. It's called River at Dusk, painted only in 2018. So we're looking here at a 2-year-old picture. So they often call this market wet paint, and although it probably is dry, it certainly you could argue this one is a wet paint. The expectation was 7 to 10 million Hong Kong dollars, which is about £700,000 roughly. It's a tenth of the estimate. So, you know, not a shy estimate in that respect. However, it sold for very nearly 40,000 Hong Kong, 37,700, so 37 million rather, 700,000. These are quite big numbers when you're talking in Hong Kong dollars, which is a new world record. So that is in effect 3.7 million pounds. So very nearly, or certainly over 4 times the pre-sale estimate.
No,
you carry on.
No, I was going to say, it's a fascinating story with regards to the market. And we all hear the unfortunate scenario that when artists do pass on, that their work is, you know, generally it takes a little while for it to be considered as so important. But this almost seemed to happen overnight, didn't it, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think it's come out of nowhere, considering this big picture has only been in existence for 2 years. I mean, he had died early last year, so you know, obviously people were aware that there'll be no more work. So it could well be that people see this as an opportunity. And I suppose if you're looking out there to try and persuade people to sell, it may well be that they're thinking they'd rather not. So you have a rarity factor as well, people perhaps hanging on to work. And there's obviously now a limit to how much is out there. But I think what I like about this is obviously its quality, but it's certainly something that is very much something you could live with.
I like the fact that it is, as not to call it a throwback, but, you know, an oil on canvas. And I think there is something still quite special about owning an oil canvas, especially of that significant size as well. And, you know,
what's the phrase? What's not to like?
Well, exactly.
Other than the price, of course.
But the great thing about that is that the colours are so bold, and the reason why I asked what medium it was, because it almost could be a kind of a digital print or something like that, because it is so bold. And it's very nicely done. Obviously, you can't get away from that Hockney influence, but it's a charming piece and a really interesting piece into the way that the market clearly is going. Which is fascinating. Let's move on to another one of the images that you provided us with. Let's have a quick look. Let's have a look at this one, seeing there's the next one up. So, Jonathan, this is by one of the psilocybin.
Yes, this is by one of the younger artists, and again, you've got a clearly very narrative image here. This is by Violet Hwami. I'm absolutely not 100% sure how she likes her name to be pronounced, but I think it's Hwami.
Okay.
And she's taking here a mixture of elements, so a clearly very strong female nude, but with a sort of psychedelic element to it. She's quite young. I think she's born in 1993. So I think
that makes me feel old.
She's, I think, almost the youngest in our group here. And she was selected by Zimbabwe, where she comes from, to represent them at the Venice Biennale in 2019. So a reputation here. And this particular one, I'm just checking my details here. This is really, it's a play on the theme of Eve. And this was the first lot in a recent auction in London. And let me see, the whole sale, I think, did particularly well, but this one was estimated to make around $40,000, but in the end made $252,000. So again, almost 5 times, or slightly over 5 times its pre-sale estimate. Now,
it's a strong image, though, and I think for this time it's a strong image. You've got this almost kind of Freud-esque kind of nude with this very, very vibrant kind of background, which is quite different, isn't it?
Yeah, and this came up in New York. So we're the last one by Matthew Wong was Hong Kong sale.
Mhm.
It's developing these sort of key centers, New York, London, and Hong Kong, for new artists, new names. And I just wonder, in this new age we find ourselves, that actually people are just going for it one way or the other. And maybe because they're no longer sitting in the same sale room space as they might have done, they're detached, they're sitting at home, they're feeling braver about what they go for. We talk about the sort of money that's being spent on these. There's a very strong possibility that both for the Matthew Wong and this piece now, that the purchaser may never have actually seen either of them in the flesh.
Of course.
You're extending the idea of the digital world into the fact that you've just spent over $200,000 on something that you probably won't see until it arrives at your home or wherever it is you're going to show it, and then you unwrap it. So that might be exciting, or hopefully not disappointing.
I was going to say that Matthew Wong picture, though, without being able to see it in the flesh and the size that it is, I mean, it must be quite a punt to take that up.
Yes. Although the auction houses and galleries, particularly auction houses, Sotheby's is an example, are using the new medium that we find ourselves in clever ways. So you can, when you're looking at something, you're thinking about whether you're going to buy it, it is possible to select quite simply, and I'm not particularly techie, but you can select quite simply a visualization of the size of the picture on your wall. So you have a figure standing to give you scale, and you have a big white wall, and you can select the image and it puts it up on the wall. So at least you can see quite what you're getting, and with a tape measure work it out. So it is possible to much easier to buy virtually than it was before.
No, it's fascinating. Again, another indicator of the times we're in and the way it seems to be working at the moment, which is...
Well, yeah, I think, before I came on this evening, I was reading something which I'm not even sure I can begin to understand it, but it's a purely digital piece. So we're talking about 2 oils on canvas here, and this is a virtual piece by an artist called Mike Winkelman, and it exists, so you can see it on your screen, but you can't hang it on your wall. You have a sort of a pin number, which, if you are the successful buyer at auction, the auction starts next week at Christie's, February 25th, I think it is. And the starting bid is $100, which is pretty reasonable. Mm-hmm. And the buyer will then be given a sort of pin number, which will enable them to look at the visual or virtual piece, but at no point will it have a frame on it, or be printed, or exist in any other form other than digitally.
It sounds like the Bitcoin of the art world, Jonathan. Yes.
I think you may understand this better than me, but it's linked to blockchain.
Okay.
So that might explain it. I'm not sure I understand what blockchain is, but
I think blockchain is an entirely different webinar on its own, and I only have a base understanding of it. But it's not the easiest thing to from my point of view anyway. It's not the easiest thing to understand.
It does sound mightily complicated, but this guy, rather like various street artists, also has a street name as well. It's Mike Winkelman, and I think he's called Beadle or something like that.
Okay. I suppose it was only a matter of time before this actually started happening, though, really, wasn't it? This type of embracing of the digital age. And I suppose that somebody, will look at things in the same way, as they do with films or with music, whereby you don't actually own an entity, you own the ability to view it or to listen to it or just to see it. So I suppose that's, is it for the sake of it? I don't know, but I suppose it depends on the quality of the art. But let's have a look at another image that we can have a look at here. Something slightly different. And I quite like this. It's my bag, I would say. And I think this is quite nice.
Yes, it's interesting you say this. This is by an artist called Bernard Frize. And he is essentially French, but has worked in America also, and is from the 50s generations. He's born in 1954. And when you look at other pieces by him, then, so the first two, Matthew Wong, they are much younger, but there's a freshness to this and an elegance. Maybe, I'd be hard pushed to date the painter, but it's true to say that he is pretty much the same age as me.
But it's an early 21st century piece, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. But as you say, it's difficult to date. I think you've got certain aspects that could be 1950s, but it could be very modern as well.
Yeah. Well, this one, you'd have thought, he's pretty established as a painter. And it seems that unlike the others who are new, here's someone who is not exactly old, but is well established. And it seems crazy, but somehow after all of these years, a 65-plus-year-old painter is being appreciated. And this one came up in Sotheby's in Paris. I chose this because it's another sale site, quite interesting. And in December, estimated at $50,000 to $70,000, so that's probably about 40 to 60,000 euro, and sold for $198,000. So I guess something like 170, 160,000 euro.
And just to ask the question, I'm assuming that all these pieces that have actually made a significant amount over this period of time is almost bucking the trend with the artist. I'm assuming they must be kind of on an upward trajectory, but it obviously is quite outlandish when considering the auction house's estimates that they would make this kind of figure.
Yes, I think for those of our listeners and viewers who are familiar with the way that the stock market works, generally speaking, there are some similarities that, here, I think with a much wider audience now online than we've ever seen before, you've got perhaps an element of speculation. You've also got an increased ability for anybody who's interested to find out very quickly about painters with all the portals which will give you details about the artist's life and exhibition history, and very recently the prices. So you have an easy enough way to compare. I think it's very encouraging for people, and maybe they see things that perhaps pre-COVID they might not have either had time to look at or simply not been bothered with. I think this is a very elegant piece, and it's reflected, the price is reflected in simply the number of bidders, or the strength of people's ability to bid, or the sheer weight of numbers, but also the quality of the piece itself, which I think is standout.
No, it's lovely. And just for our listeners and viewers that might not completely understand the way in which the auction world works, when an auction house, for example, puts on an estimate, so in this case, the estimate, let's have a quick look, was 49,000 to 73,000. What that means is the auction house is expecting to sell it for around that figure. And in this instance, it actually sold for, let's have a look here, 198,000. So obviously well over that. But the auction house were expecting potentially for it to sell quite beneath that. So it is something that to a certain degree is unexpected.
Yeah, and also perhaps if you were to watch or attend or bid at the auction, there's an element of competition as well. So sometimes it's possible that in order to encourage interest from those people who are in two minds, then it's not that it appears cheap, but it might appear reasonable. So there's all sorts of elements at play here. It's opportunity, something really very beautiful by this artist at what appears to be a reasonable price. That's quite old school, all of that. What's new is how much easier and how much more accessible these things are than they were not that long ago.
No, Barman's. Now, this was obviously a very, very elegant piece, and from possibly the most elegant piece that I think you very kindly sent some images of, to one that's a little bit more fun, shall we say. Let's have a little look at that.
Oh, yes.
The Rokkaku.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is much more fun. And this particular artist, who, among all of the others who have had what I would call a sort of academic career, Ayako Rokkaku, is largely self-taught. Now, you could say immediately, close your ears and think, well, that's it, then I'm not interested. But there is a relatively long and reasonably illustrious history of artists who have taught themselves. And there's an element of design and style in this, which really makes it great fun.
No, it's
sorry, carry on.
It's one of those things that it's nice to have in the list of images that we've been looking at, and just something that stands out, because it is something that somebody's going to go, oh, hang on a second, and just from the concept kind of point of view of it, it's just good fun, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, and there is, although we're just looking at one here, if you were to look at 101 of them, then at the end of all of that, you sort of really get your eye in as to what this artist is all about. So there's a degree of certainty and peace of mind in buying something which is a signature piece, which this is. And there are other examples of other artists who this artist happens to be Japanese, and there are other Japanese artists with a similar style. But this is unique, and I think is huge fun. I mean, this particular one came up.
And it's got that anime kind of manga kind of influence to it.
Yes, I mean, you can sort of see, you can get that Japanese feel. This one offered at 40 to 70,000 US dollars, sold for just over 300,000. So there's a pattern forming here, isn't it? That it made a multiple of 5 over its expectation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a colossal rate above the actual estimate there, isn't it? It must have been a significant amount of competition for it. No, it's just good fun. And that's possibly why I like this one.
Well, you look at an artist like Murakami, who's roughly, I mean, older than this particular artist, but much, how can I put it, much more illustrative. This is not illustrative. This is pure painting. And so it has a degree of naive quality that you don't get with Murakami or similar artists of that generation.
Fantastic. Let's just do one more from your very, very well received article, Jonathan. Let's just have one more image that, and I'm going to pick this one because I quite liked this one.
I think this is one of my favorites too.
Yeah, so what can you tell us about this, Jonathan?
Well, yes, this is by an LA-based, relatively young artist called Alex Gardner. This particular one is Moment, and like the Matthew Wong at the beginning, is a relatively new work from 2018. Was offered this time in New York in December last year, and is, I hesitate to say, the cheapest at 20 to 30,000 US dollars, and this particular one went on to make 170,000. He was born in 1980.
It seemed cheap at that initial estimate, though, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think you picked up here the sort of, again, it's not quite a theme, but if you're going to offer artists who, generally speaking, have not either in the past or recently made big money, then there's no point in trying to make it happen by putting overly ambitious pre-sale auction prices on them. It's sort of, it feels like a risky strategy, but in each of these cases, it's been rewarded.
Yeah, certainly.
And again, this is Alex is international, and I think what's interesting is LA is becoming both a hub for artists, but also for galleries as well. So you're getting all over the world. It was always thought that because San Francisco was such a hub for tech industry moguls, that's exactly where the galleries would form up. But indeed, what seems to have happened is the galleries and artists have gravitated towards LA, but somehow it's more of there's more energy there, and indeed the tech guys, it's not that far for them to go. So it's spawning a huge number of new narrative painters such as Alex.
Do you think the buyers are in LA more than they are in San Francisco?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you're spot on. I think it was always thought, and I think I'd include myself in that if you look, on a map of where the Facebook money, if you like, as they call it, has gone, it's generally around San Francisco. But I just, maybe that the guys who have that money are just not interested in art. They're interested in other things. It could be cars, it could be other watches, but not this.
No, it's a good picture to end our discussion on your article. Now, Jonathan, we've discussed this on a personal level over the past few weeks. Now, I'm not sure whether any of our listeners or viewers are aware of some of the sales that are currently going on around the country. But what seems to have been a bit of a recent trend is single owner sales. So, for example, dealers who have had maybe a lot of stock that's been left over for a significant amount of time, or perhaps they're just looking at changing perhaps their kind of their stock levels. And some big name auction houses have actually got behind some of these dealers and putting together some fantastically elaborate sales.
Yeah. I was thinking there was one just last week that if you like, if you're used as a dealer to exhibiting in Masterpiece or in some of the easier access fairs like Battersea, which is held in Battersea Park in London, then all of those venues have been closed probably for, getting on for a year. So you haven't really had the opportunity to exhibit. And so last week, Bonham's Auctions got together with the dealers who would normally be attending the decorative arts fairs in Battersea and presented in conjunction with them the pieces. So it's almost, I've seen single owners, but this is effectively what you would call a multiple owner event, with each of the galleries or antique dealers being showcased and offered. I think what's hard is to work out where the pricing is. In other words, it is perhaps unlike some of the ones we've been talking about in terms of painting. I think the prices probably are a bit more robust, but it's the first time in my career I've seen such a very clear hookup between the auction houses who have the portal and the facilities, so they can sort of turn on a sixpence and produce something like this, and allowing the galleries to continue to keep their profile high and also have a sale venue available to them.
It's almost, to my mind, Jonathan, it's almost a bit of a role reversal. And as you quite rightly pointed out, that the times have dictated what dealers or galleries are having to do at the moment, because there is no outlet. And the fact that auction houses are still able to have sales and to have some form of virtual kind of viewing, I think it's giving the opportunity to dealers to do this. And obviously the way in which a lot of people have viewed auction houses and dealers and the general public and the relationship in the last 10-15 years, I think has changed massively. It used to be a case that a member of the public would go into one of the big three with a painting and decide to put it for sale. It would then be bought by the trade and then be retailed by the trade. Yeah. And then gone like that. But it seems to me now, Jonathan, that it's almost a case of the general public are almost welcomed with open arms to the auction houses, which I'm sure you'll agree they certainly didn't used to be. And when they're going to buy things now, and it's now the case that they're buying stock that's come from dealers that's then going through the auction house and being bought by private buyers. So it's a very different way of looking at it.
You wonder where it's going to go. Certainly, I've been around in this business long enough to remember, that auction houses, you go back 40 years, were open at 9:30 and closed at 4:30, never open at the weekend, and were basically in effect a wholesale market for dealers who are buying from them. The public would find it quite difficult, I think, to fit in with the time schedule, to understand some of the arcane things that used to happen. And I think it all started with the idea that the auction houses felt that maybe they could do better than be a wholesale supplier to a relatively small group of people. And so bit by bit over time, they tried to expand into what I think you would call in retail the end user.
Yep.
To try to skip the middleman out. And although that makes sense, it's quite hard to do. I think in recent years, because of the much wider availability of information and ease of access, it's happened just quite naturally that people have gravitated. People aren't, people are clever. They can understand what an auction is about. It's pretty much hardwired into most people how it all works. I think it's interesting. I think I can see it going further. That what would be the ultimate swap that an auction house might say to a dealer, maybe you could showcase these pieces for us, and I wouldn't be surprised if that starts to happen.
It's an interesting concept, and I think the last year, 18 months, unfortunately, has put us in a position which has been terrible, but it's also opened up a lot of eyes in the art world, where people have had to think, okay, we're going to have to think outside the box here, and we're going to have to work, auction houses working with dealers and working with galleries and everyone working together to try and get this stuff out there and for people to actually get it seen and get it bought. And as we've proved and we've spoken about over the last couple of webinars, the markets obviously have still been buoyant and managed to actually keep that going.
Yeah, I mean, I've often thought that the auction market and the gallery market and antique dealing generally represents a significant amount of revenue. But if you think of how much money goes through the stock market or bond market or other similar markets, it really is a drop in the ocean. And maybe people who are collecting are diversifying, seeing that in a world where their interest rates are historically low, there's little point in them saving money. So maybe spending it on things that they would enjoy. There's always been a concern, is this, what's the price? I used to always be asked, is this a good investment? It's very tricky. It might be, it might not be. But if you're talking about something you don't even like, and you're going to buy it as an investment, it's sod's law. It's almost certainly not going to work, isn't it? Because you end up buying something you already don't like, and it sits on your wall looking at you day in, day out, and you're hoping it's going to be worth more, and it probably isn't going to be. Whereas if you like it, it's there, it's enhancing your space. After about 5 years, perhaps it doesn't seem like a lot of money. After 10 years, you can't even remember what you paid for it. It still looks great. And probably after 15 years, it's worth more money. I think what we've been talking about today, these are much more rapid changes. So what's developing on the side, if you like, is those people who are buying things that they like and keeping them and not thinking about them and enjoying them, and others who perhaps there's a degree of speculation, certainly with Matthew Wong and Alex Gardner.
It's high risk, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And if you continue to play the game, imagine that you make up your mind you're going to buy anything by Matthew Wong every time it comes up. Then as a pure numbers game, if you can afford to do that, then the market will continue to increase. So the amount you paid for your first one is a fraction of the amount you paid for your 20th one, or however many there are.
No, it's a really, really interesting time. And just finally on this webinar, although everyone knows that Jonathan is, a fantastic mind of information on contemporary art, he's actually also a fantastic mind of information on contemporary hip hop as well. As a message from Jonathan today informed me about one of the newest artists to appear on the scene, and that's Kanye. What can you tell me about what's happened with Kanye this week?
This is an extraordinary story. Yes, I was browsing today, and for my children are much more familiar with Kanye West than me. But at the same time, I don't live my life under a stone, so I know exactly who Kanye West is and who his wife is and what the connections are. But who knew? Certainly not me. That his artistic skill goes back right to the very beginning. So circa 1995, he's drawing and painting, and on PBS, which is the sort of American PBS is public, rather like the BBC. They have, just like us, the Antiques Roadshow, and one day a guy rocks up having inherited a portfolio, believe it or not, of watercolors and drawings by Kanye West, quite a significant amount. And I've watched the clip, and I encourage you to, if you Google Kanye West and portfolio and Antiques Roadshow, PBS, you'll probably get it. But it's about 10 or 15 minutes of these amazing drawings that he's done. I didn't know very much about his background. His mother is an English teacher, or English, and is a university lecturer. So very clever lady, and encouraged Kanye to do anything he wanted to do, and to encourage him to be good at it. And certainly as a draftsman, he's amazing. I've seen students work, and it's a cut above that.
Gosh, to be honest, I read your message and kind of tried to do a little bit of digging, but I couldn't find any examples of it. So he actually has some talent there. Yeah, yes. I mean, there's a beautiful little head. Most of the work that you see on the clip is done in pencil, or what they call in the US graphite, but basically it's you and I, it's their pencil drawings. And often you see them with teenagers. They're incredibly detailed. And that is the case in the drawings, and they are very good. There's one beautiful little gouache, so it's a bit like poster paint. It's opaque paint, and a very sensitive profile portrait, which you wouldn't really be surprised to see coming from either a graduating student. So he's, to my mind, years ahead even at that age. What I don't know is exactly how old he is, but these pieces date from 1995, so I guess he's certainly still at school. But he's got there's sort of an end to this different mediums as well. And you're probably all thinking, well, where can I buy them? Well, I think we're all too late. It seems that someone was watching the program, and through their own diligence managed to track down the owner, who really bizarrely has inherited them somehow, and therefore is the rightful owner. He's signed a non-disclosure agreement, so we'll never know how much the buyer paid the guy who's on the PBS program. I think that the expert on PBS put $20,000 on them or something like that, which to my mind, when you consider, and if you've seen any of my other webinars talking about trainers, for example, a pair of Kanye designed trainers can make more than that. So I'm fairly sure that was a fairly low ball kind of figure. I would have thought to buy that for $20,000 in the current market is probably not a bad bet. Yeah. No, I think that's what's been bought. The program shows a small selection. The specialist, I think, is very careful and very considered in the way she talks about it, and immediately understands the quality and points to selects, I think, 5 or 6 drawings, and they're priced between, I think, $2,000 and $3,000 up to $5,000. So just what you're looking at on screen comes to $20,000, and there's a whole bunch of stuff still in the portfolio. So I'm taking a wild guess, but I wouldn't be surprised if whoever's bought them has paid $100,000 for them simply to own them, because there's no way you could really be sure what they're worth. But just having them is a very sure way of just making sure that at least you've got them. And I think that's a new development in collecting. It's no longer just about what you pay. It's you've got them. In other words, you've won the auction, or you bought the prize. They're nice things to own. I mean, especially if you are a fan, but also in terms of musical history. I mean, we've all seen musicians who turn their hands, shall we say, to art. Some more successfully than others. But it's obvious that Kanye has some talent there. Yeah, it's clearly there, and you just wonder. I don't know whether he still paints, but if he was to join us, or is indeed watching this webinar, which may or may not be true, I would encourage him to go back to
to painting. Yeah, there's a long history, isn't there? There's Stuart Sutcliffe, the fifth Beatle, who was an art student with John Lennon. You know, he's a very good painter, probably a better painter than he was a musician. But you know, the work gets slightly confused, and I don't think that's the case with Kanye. That it's the images are not pop images. They are. You know, I'm not sure I could detect a style, but there certainly is a distinctive style there. He's not just slavishly copying something else. There's a degree of originality.
So there is certainly a skill. Fantastic. Yeah. Jonathan, I think we're running a little bit out of time here, but we could talk about Kanye all night, and no doubt next time I see you, we'll listen to a couple of his albums and discuss the qualities of those as well. But Jonathan, a pleasure as always, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining us again this week. We'll be back next week with another subject, and in the meantime, do follow us on LinkedIn or send us an email if there's anything you'd like specifically covered on one of these webinars. But in the interim, stay safe, and we'll see you very soon. Take care, Jonathan.